Hi. Little bit of a personal footnote here. I'm currently doing a course to basically get the accreditation to be a freelance journalist. And should I pass the course, there's no reason I envisage that not happening because it's paced out and it's formatted in a way that's very it's pressurizing but manageable. I think that's the best way to put it. Um, so I keep looking at that sort of time. It's a self-paced course online, so I'm not like necessarily having to meet any looming deadlines. But I opted for freelance journalism because I want to have the flexibility to not be tied to any outlets or publication. Um, to kind of have to nail my colours to the mast, to use an expression that is actually just for a little piece of side information originating in my city here in Sunderland. Local hero Jack Crawford apparently put up a mast, the Union flag, during the Battle of Camperdown in the Napoleonic Wars, and hence the expression "nail your colour to the mast." The ship's mast had been shot down by the French, and he brought it up again, for which he was seen as a hero. Um, Maybe in the Dutch, can't remember. Anyway, which would make it an earlier war, but I'm going off on a tangent here. So for me, the values of journalism, the ethics of journalism, are something I'm very interested in, and I think is so important in this world. Journalism can be powerful. It can be important. It can inform people. It can enlighten people. It can move people. Journalists witness history. Journalists record history. I have enormous respect for frontline journalists and the very real risks they take. Not just in war zones where it's literally life and death, but also, for example, in covering organized crime or in covering totalitarian regimes, which may not be a war zone, but where they do risk, if they're an outside journalist, getting roughed up by security services or harassment. So, to me, the power of journalism is critical, and I don't think you can have a free society without a free press. Now, for me, a free press, in its most basic definition, is one that is not kowtowing to any political party or government. A free press is one in which journalists hold the powerful to account, whether they be politicians or judges or others. Um, and a free press is also one that allows itself to be criticised. That's an important aspect of it, whereby they too can face criticism, and there are avenues for complaint if someone has felt they've been treated unfairly and so on. But what I've noticed in recent years, particularly with the rise of social media and the internet, uh, that aspect of the internet, I should say, is the sheer amount of conflicting sources and information that is out there, which has sort of meant that any major conflict today, and there are a few examples of this, the Georgia War in 2008, or the South Ossetia War, whatever title you think is more appropriate, the Ukraine crisis, and the Syria War are three prominent examples of media wars. These are wars, armed conflicts that have really, whereby the media has become like another player, another weapon, and its its influence cannot be underestimated. It really can't. Um, and there is a degree of confirmation bias. You will endorse sources that you tend to trust more if they sort of fit into your political leanings. But what I do find deeply concerning is the amount of propaganda that is out there propping up dictatorships. I mean, this goes against the very idea of transparency and openness if you have sources that are actively propagandizing for dictatorships. It just goes against the very nature and values and ethics of what free journalism should be about. So, to me, this shouldn't be a case of Western media versus non-Western media. Um, I'm always a little suspicious when I hear people bash the mainstream media because my first question is, well, what exactly do you mean by mainstream? Are you talking about big networks like the BBC and CNN? In which case, fair enough, criticize away. I share a lot of that criticism. I get very angry with certain biases that I see in those networks and others. You know, the right wing equivalent on Fox News, for example. And without question, there's biases there. No question about it. I also think the big networks need to be more flexible in terms of their complaints process. I know the BBC does have a complaints process, but it is not that straightforward. And in the United States, whilst I'm critical of Ofcom, I believe Ofcom's quite a weak organisation. In the United States, I don't know if there's any media watchdog. So there is another aspect there. Is it dictatorship of the media? I'm not sure about that. But I think it's healthy to question powerful media organizations. But here's the problem. Very often, though, those who talk about mainstream media, what they're not reverting to some small independent media outlets. They then revert to Russia Today, Press TV, and state players. Russia Today is the state mouthpiece of the Russian Federation. Press TV is the state mouthpiece of the Iran regime. CGTN and Xinhua are starting to get more international presence now. Not as much as RT, I would say, but they're starting to make their presence felt. And they're starting to use the same tactics as RT. But we're a bit more subtle about it, particularly CGTN. I mean, what CGTN done for a long time was promote Chinese propaganda, but not necessarily promote conspiracy theories about the West, which is something RT always done. I mean, RT had editorial guidance from their own mission statement to constantly present the West in a negative light. Um, so anyone today that has a thinking head on their shoulders that honestly thinks that RT doesn't have an agenda, they're utterly deluding themselves. I can totally understand people disliking Western media, but to then go to the other side and say, oh, well, RT must be telling the truth. And, you know, I haven't hid from my utter disdain for RT. I despise it because I think it is the mouthpiece of thuggish regime in Moscow. I think it is the mouthpiece of the Putin regime. And I think it has an overwhelmingly negative agenda. Because what RT will do is they'll get on so-called experts who are often disgruntled employees of organizations in the West in order to kind of give confirmation bias. So, oh, well, this person is from this organization and they're saying this, so that just proves our anti-Western narrative. RT never offers balanced perspectives. I mean, RT will never ever interview or give a real platform to someone who's critical of Russia. So you really, really need to question this. That's not to say that CNN or the BBC are necessarily totally balanced in terms of like giving pro-Kremlin or pro-Beijing people a platform. I would still argue they're a lot more tolerant than RT. As an example of this, I remember several occasions where the BBC has invited pro-Beijing people on to even criticise them. I remember, this is going back a bit, but the 2008 Olympics, I remember they actually invited on Chinese students who were attacking them. You would never ever see that on Xinhua or CGTN or RT. That's the difference. But within this realm of what is news, what is bias, etc., one thing that's emerged is so-called freelance journalists. This is of particular interest to me because it is the field that I am studying. And, you know, I'm still learning, I'm still picking this up. I know there's a lot I have to learn. I get that, and I don't pretend otherwise. But when I look at someone, for example, like Eva Bartlett, who became relatively famous, she's a Canadian national, she became relatively famous for her pro-Assad narrative on the Syria war. Now, I have to say, even before I took this course, I really had a big problem with the sort of message that she was putting out. Aside from smearing the white helmets, and lately their one of their co-founders, James Mazurier, was killed in Istanbul, or he died in mysterious circumstances. Let me put it that way. Officially suicide, but who knows what the truth is. So I shouldn't say he was killed, but he was a co-founder of the White Helmets. Russia had named him as a spy, so I think the Kremlin's capable of anything. But particularly as it occurred in Istanbul, which is geographically close to Russia, it would not be difficult for the Kremlin to pull that off. But anyway, I don't know. I'm not going to say it is or it isn't either way. But Eva Bartlett presents herself as an independent journalist. Now, when I've mentioned the subject before, I've got bombarded with Putinists and Assad apologists, and a lot of them are Westerners, and they really get worked up by what I have to say because they don't like me criticising Eva Bartlett. But here's my thing with Eva Bartlett. Here's my major contention. She tries to pass herself off as an independent journalist. That is quite simply a lie. It's a lie. You cannot, by definition, be independent if you're vocally supporting one side over another. You just can't. You can you can report the truth. So you can say, for example, this party is harassing this party is killing this party, but actually serve as a propagandist as she is so shamefully done for the Assad regime. To be quite honest, it makes my stomach turn. I think she is a disgrace to journalism. And she has the arrogance to say that she and she alone knows the truth. So people, like the sort of retorts that I got was, oh, she's been to Syria, have you? No, I haven't. But you know what? There are a lot of people who don't take her narrative who have been to Syria and who have seen the things that she claims haven't happened. This is a woman who actually claims that there has been no barrel bomb attacks on civilians, despite the abundant evidence to show that there has. To me, she is no better than Lord Haw Haw in the 30s, propping up the Hitler regime. And I'm not saying Assad is the same as Hitler. His death toll is on a smaller scale, but he is a monster. He is an absolutely appalling dictator, and he has the blood of hundreds of thousands of people on his hands, as far as I'm concerned. I've been following this conflict from the start, and it's a horrible, horrible war. Not, I mean, every war is horrible, but the thing about Syria is, it's, in my opinion, it's maybe the biggest tragedy of the last 10 years, is that a brutal dictator started a war, because this began long before ISIS was formulated in a big way, who used brute force to put down legitimate protests. These weren't Islamist protests. They were protests about fuel prices, about human rights abuses, about all sorts of aspects of daily life. This wasn't some sort of Islamist revolution that RT and Assad state media so lies about to justify the crackdown. And ever since then, unfortunately, because Russia and Assad have got the ascendancy, or rather because Assad has got the ascendancy due to Russian help, they have sort of won the media war in a sense. What I find frightening, actually, is the sheer number of people willing to believe RT's lies on the Syria war. And what am I referring to? I'm referring to the fact that RT puts out this message that any Syrian who opposes Assad is a terrorist. So this isn't only insulting men, women, and children slaughtered by this hideous regime, but it's distorting the oppressor, the tyrant, to make him out to be the good guy. That that makes me want to vomit, to be quite honest. Because I've known Syrian refugees, and they're not Islamists. They're not. They're just normal people. They're normal people who had to flee a war zone, and the people I know hate Assad and hate ISIS and the other Islamist groups in equal proportion. I mean, both sides have been responsible for atrocities, both Assad's forces and the Islamist factions that are on the ground that actually gained momentum as this war dragged on. But anyway, I digress. I just find it deeply troubling that people who have a pro dictatorship agenda, because it usually goes like this: they'll rail against Western imperialism, they'll rail against Western warmongering, and yet they have no problem with Russian airstrikes. So they're not coming from a pacifist position. They're very pro violence. They're very, very pro violence. They're pro torture. And it isn't just Eva Bartlett. There's a woman who I think may actually be of Syrian origin, and she's an Assad propagandist, but she has a channel, I believe it's called Soapbox, and it's affiliated with RT, no surprise there. But you know, she gets viral views, and her pitch is always attacking the West and propping up Assad. I just want to vomit when I hear it because, again, it's insulting the victims of this regime. And I don't know where she lives, I don't know where she's uploading these videos from, but when she says that Assad hasn't used chemical weapons on civilians or hasn't used barrel bombs, she is lying through her teeth. Even if you want to go along and say, oh, well, some of that's contentious, say that Assad is a good guy to imply that he has not used brutality against civilians is such a grotesque lie. It's sickening. And people look at these sort of so-called independent journalists and hold them up to be truth tellers, when ultimately all they are is propagandists and in some cases outright conspiracy theorists. You get someone like Alex Jones, who's legions of followers. The guy's utterly nuts. I mean, Alex Jones needs no introduction, and anyone with a thinking head on their shoulders can see that. But what's so dangerous about these people is they're portrayed to be heroic, like they're just brave truth tellers, or they're holding power to account, but they're not. They're propping up power. They're propping up dictatorships. These are not brave people who are dodging the bullets to get the truth. These are people who are knowingly and so shamefully serving as apologists for some very evil men. It just, and this is, we're talking now, we're almost in the third decade of the 21st century to think that this is happening in our world. You see, what bothers me most of all is not that they are lying, it's the fact that so many people endorse it. I'll probably get thumbed down for this video, which to me just proves my point. It proves the sheer breadth of Russian state propaganda that's infecting our societies. It's infecting free societies to the point where it's so widespread. I don't know if, even if, like, let's say the British government was to block all Russian sourced propaganda, I think it would be practically very difficult to do because it's so abundant. And people who have a grievance against Western governments, they flock to this because, oh, well, that just proves what we're saying. Except it doesn't. It really, really doesn't. I do think that we could do more, though. I think that there's absolutely no way in hell RT should have headquarters in London. I think that is an utter travesty. After Salisbury, it's like a slap in the face to the British people. I intend to write the Ofcom about this. I feel that strongly about it. Just watching my time here. I'm going to wrap up soon, but when it comes to journalism, when it comes to truth, it can be overwhelming. You just look online and you're bombarded with information and opinions, and at times it is, you do start wondering what is the truth. I think it is healthy to question every source, and I'm including Western sources here. I think it's healthy to question every source, but if you are going to get into a situation where you are of the opinion that the Russian president is telling the truth, but the white helmets are terrorist sympathizers, I would say there is something seriously messed up with your moral compass. I really would. Because you just have to look at the track record of press freedom in Russia to see that this is not a regime that is supportive of transparency and democracy and human rights. It's not. So what I say is follow the dots. So my first thing when I see someone calling themselves an independent journalist is to see what their sort of platform is. And more often than not, you'll see it links up to RT. So it is not by definition independent. It's just not. I'd have more respect for them if they didn't put this lie out that they were independent. If they just said what they were, what they were. We're pro-Assad, we're pro-Putin. I'd actually respect them more because of being they'd be upfront about it. It's the fact that they so brazenly lie through their teeth by saying they're independent, and then people lap that up. And they say, oh, Eva Bartlett exposes the West, etc. Eva Bartlett is a disgrace. Eva Bartlett is Lord Haw Haw. If you don't know the reference I'm making there, Lord Haw Haw was a British propagandist for the Third Reich. He went on radio and he propped up the Third Reich. He was eventually hanged for treason, actually. Now, I'm not suggesting the same thing happens to Eva Bartlett, but I think she is an utter disgrace. I think that woman needs to see children who've been the victims of chemical attacks, and I wonder how she sleeps at night. I really do. It sickens me to the core. In my opinion, she should have her press credentials taken away, not recognised when she comes to this country, because she should not be seen as an independent journalist. She is a fraudster. I mean, on whose authority is she an independent journalist? You know, in order to be any sort of journalist, you need press criteria. Now, I don't know if she has it or not, but if she has press criteria, it's likely to come from RT or another Russian-based source, which just proves that she is working for Russia. In my opinion, the Canadian government should seriously scrutinise her. Anyway, I'll leave it there. But please, just even if you're anti-West, if you think I'm full of shit, fine. Don't believe me. Don't listen to me. Do your own homework. Follow the dots. And for God's sake, just consider if someone is putting out this message that they're an independent journalist and they're talking about exposing the West, etc. Fine. Maybe that's what they're doing. But just consider, are they really just exposing the West, or are they promoting the agenda of the Russian foreign ministry or the Chinese foreign ministry or whatever it may be?